This video will introduce you to the coding query within NVivo. The coding query is one of the most important queries within the program as it helps you explore your coding. You can think of a very basic coding query as similar to opening one of your nodes. If I double click on memorable quotes, for example, what is displayed is essentially a very basic coding query showing me the coding of this one single node. The coding query, however, lets us do this in a much more complicated way with multiple layers of logic. To create your own coding query, head to the Explore ribbon and under the query area, choose Coding. The options will open in detailed view. You can add lots of layers of logic into this particular query, but I'm going to start with an example that uses two. First of all, I'm going to click on the plus here so I can see that I have two rows. The first thing I'm going to look for are things coded at the selected case or code, and I'm going to go in here and select just one particular theme. In this case, I'm going to look at infrastructure and click OK. My next level here, I'm going to bring in one of the sentiment themes. So this time I'm going to look at positive and click OK. What this query will do is based exactly on what we can see. So if we read from the top, all of the following statements must be true. That means both of the rows underneath must be true to produce a result. So first of all, we're looking for things coded at infrastructure and also looking at stuff coded at positive. Because all must be true, those two must overlap, and as such, this query will only show stuff coded under infrastructure with a positive sentiment. If I click Run Query, I will get the results. Down here we can see all of the different elements that overlap between these two. There's not very much, but that's okay. If I wanted to really double check this query has worked, I could use coding stripes. Select the items, in this case, positive and infrastructure, and click OK. And in this coding stripe pane, we can see all of these particular references are coded at both positive sentiment and infrastructure. So this is a really valuable way for me to explore my coding. After I am satisfied with browsing these results, I could of course go in here and untick positive and switch to negative and then rerun the query. Now we can see there's much more comments about infrastructure regarding to negative sentiment. One of the really important things with this query is to be confident. If it errors, it means the statements you have put in at no point overlap. So if I choose a couple of options and get an error message, it doesn't necessarily mean I've done something wrong. It just means that the thing I have searched for does not occur within the project. Let's look at an example of this now. I'm going to switch negative to neutral and then click OK and run the query. This message here does not mean I've done anything wrong. It's just telling me that nothing is coded at both the neutral sentiment and the theme of infrastructure. The possibilities that you have with the coding query are virtually limitless. You can continue to add multiple rows of logic to create very complicated queries. It's always worth minding that the more you narrow down these query options, the fewer results you are likely to get unless you have an awful lot of data. You'll notice that we've only used the default options when adding a row, and there are many more different things we can do. If we look at this, for example, you can look, instead of for all selected codes or cases, any selected code or case. So if I go in here this time and go and tick positive, neutral and mixed, and run the query, this time things must be coded at infrastructure and the sentiment of neutral, positive or mixed. In doing so, I've explicitly removed the negative sentiment regarding infrastructure, and here I'm looking at all the other sentiment. If I switch this back over to all, the query will not produce a result. and this time it's because I've made a mistake. For this particular query to produce a result, something would have to be coded at infrastructure and neutral, positive and mixed sentiment. This would not occur because of the way the coding is done in this particular project. Let's reset this query and start at the beginning. I'm going to add in a blank row, and this time I'm going to look at a case. You'll notice in here we can look at case attributes. So for example, I'm going to look at gender and I'm going to look at female participants. If I ran this query now, it would give me everything coded to a female participant. That would be a lot of data and it would not be particularly useful. So I'm going to add in another row of logic, and this time I'm going to choose a node. Let's go for real estate development and click OK. If I run this query, this will give me everything that is coded at real estate development under cases matching the gender female. If we scroll down here, we can see there's lots of female participants, so I know this query has worked. I could of course add in extra layers of logic. This could be either an additional case attribute, so for example I could look at the community they belong in, and this time narrow it down to Marshallburg and run the query. This time I'm only going to get things that match real estate development coded to cases where the gender equals female and the community equals Marshallburg. You'll also see that I have the option to search in selected items or folders. If I go in here to selected items and this time choose a particular file, I'm going to go for the survey responses and run this query, you will see this time it will only search for these items within that selected file, in which case it's removed the top result which was not within the survey. Hopefully this gives you a really good idea of some of the things that you can do with this particular query. It's very useful for comparative studies because you can use your case attributes to look at different groups individually. It's also useful if you have multiple data sets, different groups, different communities, or different areas of comparison that you want to look at. For example, you could look at coding before an intervention and after an intervention. You'd be able to use the filters here to look at those particular files, but still share a common code structure between both sets of data. Finally, as you would expect, you have the options to add this query to your project. This will enable you to save it and run it again very quickly, and you've also got the option to save your results. Just like saving a text search query, you have the options to save these results as either a new code or merge into an existing one. You can also save these in your query results or within your nodes or cases folder. I'm not going to save this one though. This query does take a lot of time to develop and does take a little bit of confidence to know that you're doing it right. The important thing to remember is read from the very top of the screen to the bottom and it will make very clear what you are searching for. It's also worth pointing out that this first option can be switched, so you can look for things that are not coded at. If I put this in as not coded at, for example, it will look for everybody who is not in Marshallburg. So if I run this query, I will get a slightly different set of results. Alternatively, if I switched it here, it would in effect look for the men because they are not coded at female. Of course, in this case, I would have been much better just switching the gender value at this level. Now it's time for you to have a go at using this query in your project.